you. Again, we're so excited to be here. If you know us at CHPC, you know, like, we're not usually in such fabulous space. You know, we're usually sort of squashed in our conference room or something. So really a special welcome to all of our guests, particularly to Paul Goldberger, who's been so kind to be with us today. And we have so many city officials here that I'd just like to mention just a few. I mean, we have staff from HPD who represent the code enforcement side of the agency and the technical design and review side, as well as Chief Carty from fire prevention and from our fire department. We have buildings department staff. Of course, James Colgate's going to be part of the conversation today as well. And this is very important because this isn't about just today for us. This is about how to begin taking a conversation forward about how we can rethink our housing standards in New York City. So first, well, why are we even here? I mean, it is a lovely space, and we've got a great selection of speakers, and that could certainly be reason enough. But, you know, for those of you who are not from New York, I mean, this is New York, so everybody sits here and thinks, well, what's in this for me? So what I could tell you is what's in it for me, and I hope for you, is that it's a chance to consider two key questions that really, even in this city of notorious talkers, doesn't actually get talked about all that much. And that is, what do you do when your housing standards have improved the housing stock to the point that you have a lot of people who can no longer pay for it? And that's not just a question that affects poor people, and we know that because of our tremendous affordability burdens and by our infinitesimal vacancy rate of only 2.91%. More and more people are being pushed out of the legal housing market. So the second reason to be here is that since housing standards and design are influenced directly by our society's values, which is how we think people should live, what happens when our society changes and we're not actually in sync anymore with how people want to live? So we live in a city that is very robust and has a very sustained housing production and preservation program, the biggest in the United States. Yet our chronic housing shortages continue to worsen. And our population is growing and changing, with another 1 million people projected to come here and live by the year 2030. We're becoming more and more culturally diverse, with 1 in 4 New Yorkers born outside of the U.S. And they come for the same reasons that our old, wait, now my slides have gone crazy, but they come for the same reasons that people have come for hundreds of years. They come for opportunity and a chance to live a better life. And while we've created the most sweeping housing standards that have really revolutionized our housing stock over the last 100 years, we have in fact eradicated a lot of the problems exposed by Jacob Riis when he turned his camera indoors, radical in and of itself, and revealed horrific crowding, poor sanitation and ventilation, coal-burning stoves, kerosene lamps, people unable to find an exit in case of fire. No wonder that Riis's book inspired housing activists and civic leaders to act with sweeping legislation and a system to enforce it. And this was unprecedented in the United States. Beginning with the Tenement House Act of 1901, through to the Multiple Dwelling Law and the Housing Maintenance Code, the commitment to transform the housing stock and improve the lives of families outlawed SROs, lodging houses, and the old law tenements. It set a standard for light and air, room size, and health and safety that still largely influences our standards today. It took time, but our housing stock today is the best physical condition that it's ever been since we've measured it in New York. But the other side is that the standard has steadily been increased. Fewer and fewer people can pay for it, and more New Yorkers live outside or below the housing standards. So ask yourself, next time you buy something in a shop, or you purchase a newspaper, or you have those millions of interactions with average New Yorkers every day, where do you think they're living, and in what conditions? So the question for us becomes, is it actually possible to reshape the housing stock to better meet the needs of our current population to come? No one is suggesting that we turn back the clock on hard-won improvements to the housing stock. And I know that conjures up images of declining quality of life in neighborhoods, invasion by uncivilized single adults, fights over parking, and the likely result, which I am most concerned about personally, of mobs rising up with pitchforks and torches to storm policy organizations who are fermenting debate. But instead of turning the clock back, what if actually we turn it ahead? We estimate that over 2 million New Yorkers, 2 million New Yorkers today live in some kind of shared household. It's a big number. And while some, like adult children living with their parents, like my family, pictured here, dear God, sometime they must want to move out. And so I think it's reasonable to assume that these numbers will increase, and that while some people are making these formed households by choice, many are doing it because they have few choices, in fact. So once again, we're seeing a gap develop between the housing stock that we have and the population who lives in it. So how do we occupy our housing stock now? And don't forget, this is before the 1 million more people come to our city by the year 2030. Well, while nuclear families living in a contained housing unit are the absolute obsession of public policy and certainly dominate the housing stock in many neighborhoods, they live in just 17% of our housing units. They pay dearly for that privilege, and when they take on a lodger and roommate, they increase their income by 40%. Another 17% of our housing units are occupied by couples without children. These are those, annoying people with 2 incomes and no pesky dependents who tend to do the best in competition in our housing market. Another 8% of our units are occupied by single-parent families. And fully a third, 33%, are reported to be occupied by single people living alone. That's reported. We know some people are lying about that, and they actually do have roommates or boarders, but that's what's reported. And a third of these people actually are living under-occupied. They're living in 2-bedroom apartments or larger. That creates a lot of dysfunction for competition in our housing marketplace. And while the elderly represent another third of those single-person households, we can expect that 44% more elderly people will be living in New York City by the year 2030. In total, that means that about 26% of our households, or 850,000 of our units, are occupied by some kind of sharing. That breaks down to 20% that are sharing with their families, 20%, 1 in 5 housing units sharing with their families. This, I suspect, is why the murder rate goes up around holiday time. I have no proof of that, but. And another 6% report that they're living with unrelated people as lodgers and roommates. And again, because this is what people are actively reporting, we believe this is very underreported, because we think this is the kind of relationships that people don't tend to want to reveal to the census taker who shows up at their door. And I see Mario Ferrigno, who runs code enforcement, is shaking his head yes, so I know that it's an underreport. So again, those 2 million people that we think sharing are living in 850,000 units, and they're sharing in some kind of way that is not really that well understood. We also know that people are obviously living with roommates longer, and they're staying single longer. And so this idea that single people are just sort of off to the races to get married and form families is actually beginning to change. But single people, this kind of sharing does not suit itself very well to our housing stock. So this is one kind of illegal sharing. It is actually illegal for more than 3 unrelated individuals to live together in New York City. We do have code inspection here, so any of you, if you want to just sort of leave the room right now and, kick out one of your roommates, feel free. But we actually didn't take that down in the registration. But this is an illegal situation. People don't recognize it as such. But not all roommates live in such lofty conditions. Some live like this. Both are illegal in different ways, but neither of these things are actually permitted. This kind of situation also obviously creates a huge set of problems, from homelessness to the exploitation of people. They've got no legal arrangements. They can come home and their goods could be stolen, their locks could be changed, they could pay their rent and then be locked out of their apartment, and they can be in very vulnerable situations, both physically and legally. This is particularly difficult for our immigrant population, but the truth is everyone is vulnerable when the housing market, when there's this huge underground housing market that is really operating kind of with abandon. This obviously leads to conditions that are unsafe, undesirable, unlawful. We sadly had a situation recently where 2 firemen tragically lost their lives in a building in the Bronx where they were trying to rescue people. They went into a building. They did not know that the apartments had been broken up into partition and small units. The firemen got trapped inside this apartment and they lost their lives. So this kind of this is actually the building in the Bronx where this happened. This kind of situation is not just bad for people, it puts people's lives at risk, and it's time that we kind of bring it out into the open, because this can happen not just in this kind of a multifamily building in the Bronx, but this kind of thing is happening in trendy Williamsburg, it's happening in one-family houses in Jackson Heights, and it's happening in small rental buildings in Bay Ridge. So across building types, across neighborhoods, across populations, across income levels, we're seeing the growth and dominance of an underground housing market that puts people at risk and operates also without regard to certainly fair housing laws either. So, rampant discrimination is also happening in this housing market. So, like our predecessors of the last century, we are once again at a kind of crossroads. We have some real advantages that they didn't have: microwaves, electric light, steam heat, mechanical ventilation, air conditioning, the internet, and an understanding that our environmental sustainability is actually best served by living in small spaces in places served by mass transit. And that's already why New York is the greenest city in America. So we have an opportunity to actually establish housing standards and designs that would give people a wide choice to live in safe and decent housing, a choice to live alone or with people that they want to live with, and the choice to have housing that adapts to their needs rather than having to adapt their lives to the housing that they can find. But it will require us to open our eyes to actually look at how people are really living, open our minds to some new ideas, and we hope our colleagues today will help us with that. And we've got to put down the pitchforks and torches and stop sort of demonizing these ideas about nuclear families, singles, and what it means to live in small spaces.